And on the 30th of January 1943, Herman Goring, who is the Nazi Reichsmarshal of the entire German Reich, so he's the senior military man of the entire German army from 1940 until the end of the war. And even though Stalingrad had not fallen yet, he gave this speech about their sacrifice of these German soldiers. And he gave it, and it was obviously heard on the radio, etc., and it spread. And actually, the soldiers on the ground in Stalingrad, the German soldiers, heard this speech. And again, we'll get more to what the reactions were, but I'm going to read that part of that speech right now. It made one shudder, but Stalin had enormous masses at his disposal and used old men, women, and children and did not bother about supplies or sufficient food or transport. The Russians used the whip or the bullet. The Germans alone could resist and could wrestle with such an adversary. Everything depended on them. With the greatest respect to other nations, the Germans are the only ones in Europe in a position to break Russia and destroy Bolshevism. Of all the terrific battles, the battle for Stalingrad stood out like a gigantic monument which would one day be regarded as the greatest and most heroic battle in German history. So he's referring to this in the past tense once again. This hadn't finished yet, but he's referring to it like it's in the past tense. Because for all practical purposes, it was. Back to the document. Every German soldier would come to pronounce the word Stalingrad with holy awe and remember that it was there that Germany set the seal of final victory, because people that fought like that must win. Germany has now become the guarantor of European freedom, culture, and life. But for the fighters of Stalingrad, the Russians might have obtained their objective. Now they are too late. The defenders of Stalingrad had obeyed the law which everyone must obey, the law to die for Germany. This law was not only binding on soldiers, but on the whole German nation. The nation must not question whether its stand at Stalingrad has been necessary or not. The law had ordered them to do so. So here it's saying, don't question. Don't question the sacrifice of 250,000 men. Don't question it. It was of no concern to the German soldier whether he died at Stalingrad, in the African desert, or Norway. He always sacrificed himself so that his nation might live. In ours, when some people perhaps tried to install morbid and sly thoughts into your brains, then we must always look at the Fuhrer, their shining and greatest example. They could believe that the Almighty had led this man, a God-sent man, to pass through innumerable dangers and become greater and greater, all for nothing. That Providence had given them this man who had made them into the strongest nation in the world. These are guarantees that justify our belief in victory. So we're talking about Hitler here, by the way, as a God-sent man. In difficult times, a real leader is tested, and people prove their worth in hard trials. I, the commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, suffered exceptionally when I heard of the results of the bombings. And although I did my best to prevent it from happening, it must be recognized as unavoidable and must not influence our will for resistance. We know a tremendous heroic song from a match without equal that was called the Battle of the Nibelungs. They too stood in a hall of fire, quenching their thirst with their own blood, but fought and fought to the last. Such a fight is raging there today because a people who can fight like that must win. And before these men, a millennia previous, there stood in a small gorge in Greece an infinitely brave and daring man with his 300 Leonidas stood with 300 Spartans from a tribe known for its bravery and boldness. And an overwhelmingly numerical superior enemy attacked and attacked and attacked again and again. Even then, it was a rush from the Asian East against the Nordic people. Huge numbers of men were available to Xerxes, but the 300 men did not waver or falter, fighting a losing battle, hopeless but not meaningless. And then the last man fell. And in this bottleneck, there is a sentence. Wanderer, if you come to Sparta, report that you had seen us lying here as the law commanded. They were 300 men, my comrades, and millennia have passed, but today that battle, that sacrifice still counts as the greatest example of heroic soldiering. And today this fight is there. This sacrifice is there in Stalingrad. And one day it will be said, if you go to Germany, tell them you have seen us lying in Stalingrad, as the law commanded us to protect the security of our people.